So this is a talk that I have a lot of slides for. I'm reprising some bits of other talks that I've given in the past. I could have like Tom Cruise moments. We're not going to do that. The title of the talk is There Is No Talent Shortage, and we're going to go through and try to make some of this relevant to the Cloud Foundry Summit. I'm pushing, there we go. So perfunctory introduction. You guys saw me all day. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about me. So I have been mostly doing startups. Since about 2004, I've worked on some sort of venture-funded startup, and then I ended up working on Rackspace stuff, obviously Puppet stuff. I wrote a book for O'Reilly, and right now I'm the track chair, DevOps co-chair for Agile 2014 that's coming up. I'm also on the program committee for Velocity Conference for O'Reilly, and I organize some DevOps days. I organize the DevOps days here in Silicon Valley. I just did one in Pittsburgh. And I've done some of the larger deployments, or at least at the time they were the larger deployments of OpenStack and CloudStack. And I think a lot about computers and how to make them do things, but I also think a lot about people and how to get them to work together. So we'll go forward. And I am Little Idea on Twitter. If anyone uses Twitter, that's me. So I have a particular way of presenting information, and it's not always clear to everyone what I mean, but if you have questions, I try to answer it at the level that you understand it. But I think there's some really good stuff for you guys if you can get on the ride and stay with me. And I honestly believe that what I'm telling you here is going to determine your success with whatever type of journey you're going on as a business. If you're going to believe this story, we saw a number of presentations in the last 2 days that had this theme that there is this existential crisis, that the Cloud Foundry is an opportunity for the enterprises to take advantage of some of the innovation that has happened in the big web, and the slide that James keeps showing with the Ubers and the Netflix, and everyone wants to be the Netflix unicorns, but not everyone can. And I've seen personally, and we're going to go through some of this, organizations that are trying to transform themselves, whether with Agile or DevOps or whatever the tools are, and they struggle. And I think that this stuff that I'm sharing is kind of the key to success. So meanwhile, software kept eating the world. That's a recurring theme. I'm not unique in saying that. James liked to say it. Came from Mark Andreessen, and it's not going to stop. But I'm going to go back to the past. This is my past. So I used to give talks about a tool called Puppet and about this kind of movement and a capability to automate machines. And I would say in those talks that you can either do this or you can't. Right? It's hard to like halfway do it. You either have like fires all the time, or else you get to the point where, and that's what happened with the big web, right? If you look at what Amazon, Google, the rest of the things that we're sort of drafting off of when we talk about Cloud Foundry, they solved these problems because they had to. You couldn't run Amazon, you couldn't run Google unless you solved these problems. So there's this story, and if anyone knows what that graphic is at the bottom, you could be my friend, we should hang out later. There's this story, the rise of DevOps, and this is something I used to say all the time too. Infrastructure is code, and recognizing that at the point where you have APIs that can provision machines, APIs that can configure machines, APIs that can put your systems into the monitoring metrics, whatever, that looks suspiciously like software development. So the tasks that were traditionally system administrators running scripts manually has become an application. And if you're going to manage any of these things in Amazon, Google, like that quickly becomes apparent. And so you can take all of the tooling and all the processes that you were leveraging from Agile or whatever, however you make software, and apply that to your infrastructure and your operations. So let's automate all the things. And this is a recurring theme in some of my talks. It's a Gatling gun, and it's to symbolize a competitive advantage. When this machine was conceived and created, the guy who made it thought it would end all war because it would be such a terrifying weapon that no one would want to fight against it. And it turns out that cycle through history has happened over and over again. And I think in some sense, what we're talking about with Cloud Foundry is essentially weaponized infrastructure, weaponized ability to deploy applications. So what this talk is not about is trying to convince you that talent is not necessary, or that talent is not desirable, or that talent is not an advantage, because clearly it is. But I keep hearing people in this community and other communities, startups, enterprises, who keep saying to me that we can't hire the right people. We can't find the people that can do this. They don't know how. We can't find the talent. There is a war for talent. And every time I hear that, this is what I see in my head. Stop hurting yourself. So let's define talent, because I think that one of the things that plagues our industry, when people have discussions, they use words and they don't actually mean the same thing for both people. So I think it's always good to start with definitions. So I'm going to define talent. Talent is a special ability that allows someone to do something well. We're going to kind of roll with that. That makes sense, right? Let's assume talent exists. There's something. Is there this limit? Is there some limit to human potential? Can we attract talent? Can you create things that attract talent to your organization? Can you create it? Can it be cultivated? We're going to come back to that. But these are other things you hear people say. Talent wants to work together. And talent makes more talent. Gatling gun. So we're back to the plot. Software kept eating the world. But that's not entirely true, because it's a certain type of software. Right? Shrink-wrap software is not eating the world. What we're really talking about is this change in the way, because not just the software, it's the information infrastructure and what you can do in real time, and it's only going to accelerate. There's going to be whatever Internet of Things, however you want to think about it, but it's not just software, it's this fabric of information and being able to connect to it and interact with it in real time. And this is a quote from Wikipedia, so you know it's true, defining third platforms, that's transforming the way people and businesses relate to technology. The third platform. But if that's true, and we saw a bunch of talks about Conway's law, about microservices, and it's like we want to decompose these monolithic, relational database applications and make them all small services that kind of talk to each other. Well, if you believe Conway's law, which was also in Stein's talk about microservices as well, if you believe this is true, that organizations will produce software that is a mirror of their communication patterns, why don't we, as organizations, why don't we architect our communication patterns? Right? Like everyone's talking about microservices as this thing over here, but we're not changing the way we work. We're not changing the way we talk to each other. We're not changing, and in some ways I think if you do DevOps right, you're getting some of that. Like you're changing the way people interact with each other, communicate with each other, and you're able to produce better results because of that. So how many of you are putting as much into your culture as you are into your applications and systems? We take for granted these structures of management and these styles of management that are essentially archaic, that we adopted for the last 50 years, Sloan School of Management style. But why? If there's a transition to a third platform and we're seeing these changes in architecture in the technology, why wouldn't we change the way we manage people? Why wouldn't we change the way that we think about this? And I would argue that there is a fundamental difference between managing talent or dealing with talent than there is with dealing with labor. And I'd say that most of the way that modern management thinks about things, cost accounting, is about managing labor. And we live in a very different world. If you believe the plot that software is eating the world, then why are you managing people like they dig ditches? Culture eats strategy. That's Drucker. People say this stuff. So let's talk about the definition of culture. So what is culture? What does culture mean to you? Well, when most people say culture, what they mean, it's a way of thinking, behaving, or working that exists in a place or organization. That's kind of the common definition of that. I don't actually like that definition because it's not the first way. So the culture is an act of developing the intellectual and moral faculties, and especially by education. When you say someone is cultured, what does that mean? It means that they've been educated, they've been transformed, right? And that is actually the original use of the word in the English language. So culture, as this way that we do things as a group, is sort of an additional. That's a new definition. So culture is strategy. Culture doesn't eat strategy. Culture is strategy. You can define how you interact with people. You can define how this works, especially if you are a manager. You're defining a game, which we're going to talk about in a second. So what ends up happening in most organizations is that we talk about culture, but it's a checkbox on a list, right? We talk about it, then we abstract everything into these labels, because we like to compartmentalize things. And then we try to hire people. Like, we need this talent, and like, let's make a buzzword list, and then somehow this recruiter, whisper down the lane style, is going to find this talent that's going to come and transform our organization, because we just had the right laundry list of buzzwords that's going to fix everything. You know, we reduce people to their jobs. These guys are in this box over here, and these guys are in this box, and there's a bunch of other boxes for QA and, you know, marketing people and salespeople. So what we usually do is we talk around culture. We're not talking about real culture. We're definitely not cultivating culture. We're not talking, in many cases, about how we're going to take people and make them better. How we're going to take ourselves and make ourselves better. Because if you believe in Conway's law, then you should be able to recognize that that is actually how you're going to transform. If you want to build microservices, get a bunch of people that want to build microservices, right? There's the quote, I can never pronounce his name right. He's a French guy. He's like, if you want people to build a boat, then you shouldn't tell them what to do. You shouldn't, you know, give them all the tasks to build a boat. You should teach them to long for the sea. So there's a really great talk. There's a link there. It's also on the slides. I'll post these from Patty McCord. It's a 12-minute talk. She used to be the head of HR for Netflix. She's since left, but at the time she was talking about Netflix. And she said, we're in the middle of inventing culture. We're in the middle of inventing our culture. It was deliberately created, right? And everyone talks about Netflix technology. Everyone talks about Netflix build a pass so they could deploy this software. But what they miss in most cases is that was created by people, right? So if you want to have what Netflix has, don't think about the Netflix open source projects. Think about building that culture. Think about building a culture that reinforces and empowers people to do the work that they want to do anyway. So Patty said in this talk, which when I heard this, because I heard a lot of talks, my reason for kind of getting into this topic and wanting to talk about it is I'd heard many talks about culture in you know, the DevOps community, the Agile community, culture, but then no one could make it actionable, right? So it's like culture is going to eat everything for breakfast, but then no one could tell you what to do. They just told you that there's this advantage that you could somehow get if you could just only do your culture right, but I don't know how to do that, and I'm a consultant and I'm gone, and it doesn't really matter because it doesn't affect me anyway. So what Patty said in this talk is that the real company values, as opposed to the nice-sounding values, are shown by who gets rewarded, promoted, or let go. You're defining a game. You're defining the rules of a game, which I'm going to get to in a minute. So I'm always thinking about winning. I want to win. Now it's time for the real talk. So we're halfway through, and we didn't get to the real talk yet. So the game has changed. What does that mean? I never thought of myself as a developer, but I was paid to develop. And I never thought of myself as a sysadmin, but I was paid to run systems. And I never thought of myself as a manager, but I was paid to manage. And I did whatever I could for the companies at the level I was empowered, because I want to win. And I am fascinated with the dynamics of performance and fascinated with the dynamics of high-performing organizations and fascinated with the psychology and behavior of high-performing individuals. So let's talk. What is a master? So in our industry, there's this thing you can get for 2 days of work, and you're a master. You know, we're going to have stand-up now because I got the, you know, I'm a master. It's great. Who knows who this is by any chance? This is a man by the name of Fred Edish, and he is walking into the octagon to fight in one of the early UFCs, and they're reading his lineage, and he has a black belt on, and he has the 6th degree black belt of this, and the 7th degree black belt of that, and a bunch of other stuff. It doesn't actually matter, but they had this long list of all these things he'd accomplished, and he was a master, and this is what he looks like in a minute, because he was unprepared for combat. And this is another person who has basically the almost nearly identical physical attributes, and he was trained in a different way, and he won three of the first four UFCs simply because he had a better technology. He had a better understanding of the game, the reality of the game that he was playing. This is GM. This is a picture from GM. In 1960, GM averaged almost 50% of the US car and truck market. And at the time, so there's a story in a book called The Fifth Discipline that the executives from GM went to Japan, and that they saw the factories, the just-in-time delivery factories, and they couldn't believe, they wouldn't believe that those were actually capable of making cars. Because their mental model for how cars are built was so dependent on this idea of inventory. They expected to see stacks and stacks of all the pieces that you need to build these cars, and there's this process that they didn't understand that was happening right in front of their face, and they thought, these cannot be factories. This is a pageant. This is an act that they're putting on for our benefit. There's no way this will work. It can't work. There's no way you can deploy code 50 times a day. That's crazy. It's not even real. Right? There's no way you can give developers self-service access to deploy code. That is crazy. But it turns out that you can, and Japan basically eroded a big part of that market. So I was involved in a project called Puppet really early, and I think that Puppet changed the game. But I think that the game has continued, right? Software is eating everything. All these things are changing what you can do with technology, what you could do with your mind, how you can understand these processes. These are a bunch of great tools and great books that you should probably read, and all these things are changing the game, and the rules of the game are changing very, very rapidly, right in front of our face. It's not necessary to change. Survival is not mandatory. That's not me. That's someone else. So first, we're going to have a gratuitous diversion. And someday, I want to make jokes about this, and I want people to understand them, so that's why I do this. So we're going to talk about what it means for a game to change. And to do that, we're going to have a little game theory. So the payoffs for a given strategy have changed. In the context of game theory, which is a study of mathematical models of conflict and cooperation between intelligent, rational decision makers, we're going to define rational. So that's you're choosing to maximize a utility function. As a rational agent in the context of this game, this mathematical construct, if you have information and you are playing that game, you try to make the most of whatever the payoff is, right? And so there's this thing called the Nash equilibrium. And in Nash, he got a Nobel Prize for this result, which is that there are games, in most games, there are points where no one will change their strategy. No one will unilaterally change their strategy. Right? So there's sort of a fixed point in the game where everyone will just keep playing the game the same way. And some games have multiple Nash equilibriums. They're path dependent. And so you could get into different equilibriums because of how the game's been played up to that point. And then this I'm dragging in a hand-wavy sense, because I'm not doing math for you guys right now, into this, which is actually from economics, and it's the notion of Pareto efficiency. And Pareto efficiency is an allocation of resources in which it is impossible to make any one individual better off without making at least one individual worse off. Right? So if it's Pareto efficient and you change it, then it's impossible not to make someone worse. Right? So what I'm going to argue is that most of our organizations and most of the problems that people complain about when they're trying to get things changed or make decisions are Pareto inefficient Nash equilibriums. And it's possible to make individuals better off without making anyone else worse, but no one will change their strategy, because by definition, at a Nash equilibrium, no one will change their strategy. Until the game changes. Until there's an existential crisis, and the rules of the game, and the change of the payoff from the strategies that have been employed to that point are changed. Then you have to, or you die. So one of the things I think this is good for me personally, is when I'm dealing with human beings, and they're doing things I don't like, is to think about what they're maximizing, right? What is that game that they're trying to win? There's something there that's driving their decisions based on what they know about their organization, based on what they know about my reactions, their reactions, everything around. What are they doing to maximize that? What payoff are they getting from that? So we're gonna keep plowing forward. So I've seen a lot of stuff. Some of it is I'm very fortunate. I've been very fortunate in my career. Some of it was by my choices, some of it was by my circumstances, but I got to see a lot of stuff. And I try to pay attention. I might act all silly and crazy, but I definitely want to win, and that requires understanding where you are in the game and taking decisive actions to win. So I try to pay attention because I want to win, right? So I saw a lot of people build software, right? And I saw a lot of people build infrastructures, and I saw a lot of agile, DevOps, culture talks. I saw a lot of successes, and I saw a lot of failure. I had more than one conversation where I spent a lot of time trying to help someone improve their process. They want DevOps. They're like, give us the DevOps. And I say, OK, here's everything you need to do. And they're like, wait a minute. How do we get the DevOps but don't change anything? That's really what we were looking for here. And then you're like, well, have fun. So one of the things that I noticed, and I basically stumbled into this research when I was reading about learning, is that there is a correlation between the success and failure of these organizations with the degree of organizational learning. And I'm going to give you some more information, some more definitions to get through that. But the 7 dimensions of organizational learning is some research that some professors, women, Watson and Mersick did in the mid to late 90s. And I think it's fascinating, and I think it is actually a great framework to think about how to unlock some of these capabilities that are in our organizations already. So what are the 7 dimensions? I'm going to go through them really quick. I have one slide for each one. So continuous learning is a dimension. So continuous learning is basically the organization's effort to create continuous learning opportunities for all members, right? In your organization, how many people are continuously learning? And then this is a very important one, inquiry and dialogue. And it's an organization's effort in creating a culture of questioning, feedback, and experimentation. Right? This is from the 90s. Team learning. It's the spirit of collaboration and collaborative skills that undergird the effective use of teams. So not only are we learning as individuals, but we're learning collectively, collective behaviors. Because learning is actually about behavior change. It's not about information. You didn't learn anything if your behavior doesn't change. Empowerment. So you're encouraging feedback and action to address the gap between the current status and vision regardless of rank. A lot of organizations struggle with that one. Embedded system. This is probably the hardest one to explain, but it's basically like if you're from XP background, it's sort of the shared metaphor idea. It's this notion that we have jargon. We have these models that we collectively build as a tribe, that we can exchange information in those models, and that's more semantically dense than explaining everything from the bottom. So in your organization, if someone says something like Bosch in this community, it means something. If someone says, CF push, if someone says all these different jargon things, those are kind of the embedded system that this community is building around this sort of set of tools, if that makes any sense. And then system connection is how an organization is connected to itself, both internally and externally, and able to take that information. So how does information come in and out and around inside of the organization? And then finally, strategic leadership. And that is the extent to which leaders act strategically using learning to create change. Because, as I said a moment ago, learning is all about behaviors. If you didn't change your behavior, you didn't actually learn. You might have got all the information, all the big data, whatever sensor network you build. If you didn't change your behavior, did you really learn anything? So how do we measure this? Well, funny you should ask. These women have this thing that they made back in the day called the Dimensions of Organizational Learning. I'm going to show you some of them. And they're all in the form of questions. So in my organization, in the form of questions. And it's one of these self-assessment things, so you can do analysis on how self-deceptive we are when we take surveys. But there it is, right? So the first, this is a small sampling of what is a much larger survey. So I just want to give you a taste of it. In my organization, people openly discuss mistakes in order to learn from them. And in the survey, you rate your organization, 1 to 10. Do we openly discuss mistakes in our organization? In my organization, people identify skills they need for future work tasks. Who's doing that? In my organization, people are encouraged to ask why, regardless of rank. Simple, right? In my organization, groups focus both on the group's task and on how well the group is working. And in my organization, so this is powerful. My organization builds alignment of visions across different levels and work groups. And these are questions, right? These are in the form of questions. How powerful would it be if those things I just showed you weren't questions? What if those were statements? What if in your organization those were statements? We openly discuss mistakes. We empower people regardless of rank. And not just in words, not like the 5 values, but we incentivize people to do that. Because if you don't incentivize it, it won't be real. It won't happen. Finally, the learning organization is one that has the capacity to integrate people and structures in order to move towards continuous learning and change. So what does it mean when you get a new person? Like we're talking about scaling these services, microservices. We're going to bring up new containers and we're going to add them to the cluster and it's all going to work because etcd is going to fix everything. How do you bring new people into your organization and collectively connect them? What's the etcd for your organization to get everyone on the same synchronized configuration? How does that work? And I'm going to argue that learning cannot be something that happens outside the process. Learning is the point of the process. So everyone's talking about continuous delivery, continuous integration, continuous learning. That's what it's about. Continuous integration is about feedback, about information. If it doesn't change your behavior, it doesn't matter. It's a learning process. Cultivate sharing. Cultivate individuals. Help people be better. Because if you want to be good, you got to learn to be better every single day. And this is supported by research. A learning organization not only has the advantage of increasing capacity of cultivating the talents, but has advantages attracting and retaining talent. Do you want to win? So finally, to the finish line. This is an amazing time. It's exciting, right? It's exciting to be here. It's exciting to think about what's possible. It's exciting. There's Docker right across town. That's exciting. It's an amazing time. Software keeps eating, and it's not stopping. It's going to accelerate. And I'm going to argue that you're either building a software business or you'll be losing to someone is. But that's obvious, right? That's the whole point of software is eating the world. That's nothing. That didn't adding new information. Didn't change your behaviors. I'm going to alter that just a bit. You're either building a learning organization or you'll be losing to someone who is. The game has changed. And that's all I have. I'll post these slides. I have links to some of the stuff I was referencing. There's some research papers. There's even more stuff I didn't put in the references if anyone wants to get into a really deep conversation about this. And I think we're basically, I don't know, it said on the schedule James is supposed to come give some closing remarks, but I don't see him. So I think we're supposed to have a reception, unless anyone has any questions. Because I'm the last talk, so might as well take questions if you have some. Should we reception? I don't want to stand between you and food and drink, but if you have anything you want to talk about, I'll be back there with the food and drink. Perfect? And thanks for coming to Cloud Foundry Summit.